Well, good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon. Orchid cactus. Look at the growth on them. They're all doing really, really good. I've only got one or two. Another one of my viewers asked me about these earlier today. They're all growing, doing really, really well. I've only got one or two that are just kind of dormant, but even them I've noticed have started putting out. See, they've got little shoots starting to come out the bottom now. So they are starting to respond. The others are all doing really good. Really, really growing. Dendrobiums are blooming and blooming. I was inside answering questions earlier. I love answering all the questions. You guys asked some of the greatest questions. Beautiful spikes on Decidiums. Sherry Baby. Banfildera. Dendrobiums are blooming. Really pretty one. Yellow one with a purple throat. Just a gorgeous dendrobium, I think. This one's really beautiful. Pink flower with a yellow center. Really pretty one. This is Chan Chow, Dendrobium Chan Chow. Probably one of my all-time favorites. It's starting to slowly close up, start to finish. It's been blooming for a couple of months almost. Dendrobium up there has big flower spikes on it also. Several big spikes. They're all doing well. They're all just growing and growing. One of the questions I get is about keikis, and I'll be honest, I don't have enough experience or haven't had orchids long enough to be able to talk about keikis in depth or do anything other than just give my opinion on them. I know keikis are a concentration of hormones. To me, and I've seen everything from temperatures induce keikis, and I'm sure temperature has something to do with it, triggering a growth season versus a flower season or something like that. Most of the dendrobiums that have keiki tendencies, I've noticed, also have that very distinct wet and dry period. A lot of equatorial orchids don't have that much difference in temperatures throughout the year, but they may have a big difference in hydration. There may be times where there's no rain for 5 or 6 months, and other times where it's monsoons, non-stop rain for several months. I think those are the ones that are more prone to the keikis than some of the others. Again, just my opinion. Keikis, I think, are a response from the environment during that time when plants are resting, concentrating hormones. And remember, hormones are what tell a plant to grow a shoot or grow a flower spike. Hormones are what control the plant's ability to grow or grow leaves or grow a shoot or grow roots. It's what tells a plant, it's what controls it. Hormones are influenced by temperature, by light, and by nutrients. So I think when these plants are concentrating hormones, trying to get all their stuff ready for their bloom, and they get an influx of hydration during that dry time when it's resting. And you have to keep in mind also, when nutrition comes, that's when nutrients are available. When it's dry outside and water is not flowing around and rain's not flowing around, nutrients are not flowing either. Nutrients have to have moisture or water to move them around. So when the rains come, nutrients come, and that triggers that plant, tells it that your best bet under these circumstances would be a keiki versus a flower spike. Now in this case, I think I hit this plant halfway between its cycle, and I got one of each. This plant had bloomed past late winter, then went dormant for several months, and while it was dormant for several months, concentrating hormones, it was growing lots of roots and had some little nodes poking out here and there where the new blooms were probably going to come out, where the new spikes would be coming out. But that's all it was doing. He was prepping for the bloom, and I brought this plant out in May, first couple of weeks of May, this past May. It wasn't quite out of its rest cycle yet. The rest cycle probably didn't finish until end of June or 1st of July almost, normally. But I brought it out here before its rest cycle had completed, and one of the first things that happened when I brought my orchids outside was they all got heavy rains. We got rain for about 6-7 weeks here when I first brought them outside. And during that time I started spraying lots of nutrients and a lot of calcium and nitrogen too. And I think that's what happened. I think that's what does happen is while that plant was resting, concentrating its hormones and getting ready to bloom, it gets an influx of hydration, which it normally wouldn't get, and that hydration brings nitrogen with it. That nitrogen influences those hormones and tells it that the best bet under those circumstances, heavy rains, would be a keiki. And if you think about that from a common sense standpoint, it kind of goes it fits together. During heavy rains or monsoons, high moisture, high humidity, blossoms, blooms, petals, and the pollen that they produce does not fare that well. Pollinators like butterflies, moths, bees, wasps, etc., they are not out during heavy rains or during high moisture conditions. They like a drier period before they start flying around also. During drier conditions, this would be your best bet for me, best method of reproduction. And this is all we've done was just triggered more than one method of reproduction. Most plants have more than one method of reproduction. Whether they're growing bulbs or runners or stolons underneath the ground and blooming at the same time, like most plants, they have multiple ways of reproducing. Same with orchids. We've just triggered more than one of their ways right here. These, I'm sure the keikis would end up getting larger and falling off under their own weight, or from the wind blowing back and forth, or animals bumping them would knock them off. They would fall into the water. A lot of these things grow over water or streams, rivers, swampy areas. They would fall to the ground or flow downstream and start a new plant somewhere else, propagating itself again. During heavy rains, when there's lots of nutrients going around, flower spike wouldn't be your best method of reproduction. But a keiki would be. A keiki requires lots of nutrients, lots of moisture. It wouldn't do that well during a dry period, whereas a flower spike would. See what I mean? So when the plant gets that message during its dry period, when it's supposed to be doing a flower spike, and it gets that influx of nutrients, which it normally wouldn't have at that time, and especially gets that nitrogen, that hydration, and that nitrogen comes with it, it triggers the plant and tells it this is what we need to do, and you end up getting a keiki. Just my take on it. It's hard to find any information on keikis. You can find lots of information on keiki paste and how to grow keikis and stuff like that, but not a lot on where they come from or what causes them. Dendrobiums aren't the only plants to grow keikis. Like Phalaenopsis, they grow keikis also, but I'm not sure if their keikis are entirely induced by nutrients or if they're more temperature related. There's been some research that has shown they're more temperature susceptible and can cause the keikis in Phalaenopsis somewhat. Temperatures can. High temperatures during their hormone concentration periods. Again, I'd have to look into more of that to be able to talk about that. But I don't think it's quite as nutrient related as like dendrobiums are. Dendrobiums I see the fascination with these plants. They have a unique ability to, as a lot of orchids do, to manipulate their nutrients and manipulate their cells based on what their nutrient values are. That kind of reminds me of that deciduous factor that you run into. Anytime you're looking up dendrobiums, you run into that deciduous factor. They talk about dendrobiums being either evergreen or deciduous, and of the deciduous types, there's semi-deciduous. There's deciduous dendrobiums that drop their leaves a couple of weeks after the cane matures. There's some that drop their leaves several years or several seasons after the canes mature, and those same plants can hold on to their leaves and bloom and then drop their leaves and bloom. They're very selective about it. It doesn't seem to follow any pattern. When we hear the term deciduous, most of us fall back to our high school or grade school, elementary school biology classes where we talked about deciduous trees. Winter's coming on, fall's coming on, days are getting shorter, temperatures are dropping. Deciduous trees, leaves will turn colors and fall to the ground. That's deciduous. That is deciduous, and it falls under the category of deciduous. But if you look up deciduous, deciduous really means used and no longer needed, disposable, discarded, used until no longer needed, then discarded, temporary. The orchid books and most of the videos that I've seen when people are talking about deciduous dendrobiums, most of the people talk about fall coming on, winter coming on, like most people know the term deciduous. The books imply it. They use the terms autumn, they use the terms fall, winter, things of that nature when they're talking about deciduous dendrobiums. I don't think it's that at all. I don't think it's even close to that. I think some of the dendrobiums have the ability to drop their leaves possibly during that time in the fall, so the timing may be right, but it's not really for those reasons. The term deciduous, if you look up the term deciduous, two of the examples that they'll give you all the time are, one is baby teeth. We keep our baby teeth until our permanent teeth come in, and then we drop our baby teeth out. They're disposed of. We keep them until they're no longer needed, then they're discarded. Another example they use all the time is deer antlers. The bucks will grow their antlers prior to breed season. They will grow antlers to fight with each other over the breeding rights for the females. After breeding season's over, the antlers will fall off. Used until no longer needed and then discarded. That's deciduous. And that's more what they're implying when they talk about deciduous dendrobiums. That's more what they're implying. They keep their leaves until they no longer need them, then they discard them. Whether it's a temperature thing, which I don't think very many of them fall into that category, like everybody thinks about fall's coming on, winter's coming on, temperatures are dropping, etc. It's much more selective. Some of them have developed that ability to drop their leaves during very, very dry, prolonged dry periods, because you lose a lot of moisture. It takes a lot of hydration, a lot of moisture to keep your leaves completely hydrated, and a lot of it evaporates or is given off into the atmosphere through the leaves. They lose a lot of it. They transpire a lot of it through evaporation. So it would be better to drop your leaves during a very, very prolonged dry period and just keep leafless canes to save yourself. That's deciduous, but again, doesn't fall into that fall's coming on, winter's coming on, temperatures are dropping, kind of how they infer it, how they imply it. Mostly what they're talking about when they talk about deciduous dendrobiums, and you have to understand that nutrients, here I go talking about nutrients again. I've got a little bit of coffee in me to get me moving around today, so I might be talking too fast. I hope not, or just chattering here. But nitrogen and calcium in their natural environment is available all the time. They can find pretty much nitrogen and calcium anytime they want it. Orchids don't have a lot of self-regulation on that, or they have regulation on that. They will absorb as much as they need and then leave the rest behind. And it's available to them in large quantities, compared to P and K, which is not available very often, and when it does come around in their natural environment, it comes around in tiny amounts. So they've learned to hoard it. They don't have a lot of self-regulation when it comes to P and K. One of the reasons I don't like bloom boosters when it comes to orchids, because they will, and they've used that term before in the books, like kids in a candy store, they will absorb toxic amounts of P and K if it's available to them sometimes. They will keep absorbing and keep absorbing. They've learned how to hoard it. That's why they've learned how to recycle their flower spikes or recycle those lower leaves. When they drop the lower leaves, it's usually from potassium, more than nitrogen, I think. Excuse me. Sorry about that. Anyway, like I said, nitrogen and calcium, it's available quite a bit, and it's available in bigger amounts, larger amounts in their environment, and they can self-pick. They can absorb as much as they want, leave the rest behind. P and K, they will absorb it to the point where it's almost toxic, because it's not available very often. It only comes around rarely and in tiny amounts. Studies have shown that P and K values in dendrobiums and other orchids might be anywhere from 25 to 30 times higher than what they would have naturally in their environment, in the surroundings around them naturally, or what is available to them. That much higher, which shows you that they hoard it, they hang on to it because it's important to them. So knowing that going in, if you were a dendrobium and you had bloomed prior in your first season, you bloomed and your bloom's finished up, and now 6 months later you're going to bloom again, or your bloom season's coming around, and prior to that you did not get that P and K that came by. The fruit didn't set on the trees, the flowers didn't set on the trees, the fauna didn't come around, the insects didn't come around, the monkeys or other life or fauna, the rains didn't come, or for whatever reason Mother Nature left that P and K out, and you didn't get a little tiny bit of P and K that you normally would get. They will self-regulate themselves. A dendrobium, this is what they mean by deciduous, they would drop their leaves, which would contain most of their nitrogen being a mobile nutrient. If they wanted to absorb it, they could absorb it out of the leaves. But studies have shown that the leaves that these guys drop contain a lot of nitrogen, no P and K hardly at all. They've sucked the P and K out of it, removed it, but the nitrogen they're dumping off, which if you think about it, if you have N, P, and K in your nutrient reserves, and you toss all your nitrogen away, what's left? P and K, which would influence your hormones to give you a flower spike versus a growth. See what I mean? So if the plant was really trying to do that, and it didn't get the P and K that it normally got during that time of year, all right, they will drop their leaves to self-regulate their own reserves and ensure that they can bloom if that's what they're trying to do. They're not worried about the nitrogen, dumping the nitrogen, because they can get nitrogen anytime they want. It's available in their environments all the time. So they can get that anytime they need it. So they will dump off the excess nitrogen in order to adjust their own ratios of their reserves. Even though they didn't get additional P and K by dumping off their nitrogen, the P and K is now the higher ratio and would ensure or influence the bloom. Do you follow me? It also would explain when I get messages from my viewers. I have the best viewers, the best subscribers. They send me messages. I've gotten a lot of them that have, and this is one of the reasons I was talking about this, was they tell me that they have deciduous dendrobiums, but they're no longer deciduous. They're growing beautifully, they bloom beautifully, they have beautiful canes, lots of leaves, but they normally were dropping their leaves and they're no longer doing it. Why would they do that? And I think it was on a video a week or so back, might have been Roger's Orchids, I believe it was. Roger has beautiful dendrobiums, all his are gorgeous. He's a wealth of information, has a beautiful collection. He was talking about one of his dendrobiums that was blooming beautifully as usual, and he made a comment that it wasn't dropping its leaves. It was deciduous dendrobium, but it wasn't dropping its leaves anymore. Why would they do that? If you think about that they don't get a lot of P and K in their environment, it helps influence they actually will adjust their own reserves to get to that, to keep and hold on to that P and K and be able to use it. And if you think about the orchid mixes that we use, they contain quite a bit of P and K. So when we're giving a deciduous dendrobium the P and K mixes out of Jack's or Peter's or MSU or Better Grow, with all that additional P and K in there, their reserves are full. They have additional P and K available to them. They don't feel threatened. They don't feel the need to dump off their leaves and adjust their own nutrient reserves. They don't need to self-regulate their own nutritional reserves by doing that. I think that explains why Roger's orchid didn't drop its leaves, because of they're getting adequate P and K in his mix. It's why my viewers, that's what I told my viewers when they asked that question, is you're probably giving them adequate P and K in their mix and they don't feel threatened. They don't feel the need to dump their leaves or dump off their nitrogen source to balance themselves back out again. See what I mean? Again, just my take on it. Like I've said before, I wish I'd have done this years ago so I would have better knowledge and be able to talk about this stuff a little more in depth with growers. I really do. Anyway, that's my take on keikis, and I guess my take on deciduous. And to me, what it means, I think it's important to understand that because of how these guys grow. It's important to understand how they manipulate their own reserves and how the nutrients are used by the plant. It helps you grow them. Without a doubt, it'll help you grow them. I'm out scrubbing pots today, cleaning algae off pots, a little bit of moss. It's mainly on the ones that I have moss growing in the pots. Those are the ones that grow it. And so I'm going to do a little scrubbing today on some of the pots, get them polished back up, because they're going to be going back inside here in a few weeks. And I'm going to type a few bulbs and a few more new grows so I don't break them off. And I'm going to go through today and finish sprinkling on my garden lime again today. We've got some heavy rains from Florence, I think, that storm Florence, which is off the East Coast. I hope everybody remains safe and heeds the warnings and looks for higher ground, and prayers are with everybody. Please be careful. South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia, Georgia, our neighbors Georgia, all be careful. We will probably feel the brunt of that storm here probably first of the week as it blows across. We'll probably get a lot of rain here. I'm hoping we do. And at that time, I'm going to feed these boys like crazy. Come out here and feed them and feed them and feed them. So I'm going to get to it. Enjoy the rest of my afternoon. I hope you guys will do the same. Thank you again for all the great questions, all those wonderful messages, all the thoughts, all the prayers, all the kind words. Thank you. It means so much to Jan and I. It means so much. She will get on and thank everybody herself soon. I'm sure she will. They checked her port out this morning. We went in and they tested her port and everything. It's working fine. She has her first chemo on this coming Monday on the 17th. So I'll keep everybody informed how she's doing, and we'll talk again soon. Thank you again, and have a wonderful day, everybody. Thanks for watching.